Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show we're talking about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Only Murders in the Building, Season 4, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're picking up with, it turns out the feds have taken over. Which, do we know why the feds are investigating? Well, never mind. It's across states, so I guess that's why the feds would be getting involved, because it's but I mean, you would assume like the New York police would have like pure jurisdiction because Saz was killed here, but I guess because it relates to stuff in California, so I guess that makes it the feds jurisdiction. I guess I was just thinking about that. Is this also the first time they've ever crossed paths with the feds? I wonder if we're going to have a very specific federal agent. Considering the feds have taken over this case, I'd assume we'd get it. I wonder who is it going to be. It's probably going to be a big name person. Maybe not. Who ends up playing like the main fed that's investigating. There's always a possibility this might be kind of like an inside job of, the killer's actually investigating type of situation. I mean, wasn't that... Right, because I forgot. They already did that. Because Michael Rappaport's situation in Season 2 was that, if I remember correctly. But either way, because Detective Williams won't be able to be on this case like all the way through, she was like, right, I came here to fill you guys in on something. Because Mabel was like, right, like, even if you tell us not to investigate, we will. She's like, oh no, I know. After 3 seasons, I know how you guys roll. But she's also like, yo, shut up, because Charles and Oliver are going on about, whoa, she's come to tell us something because you like us. Like, she actually likes us. Which Mabel's like, yeah, she might have liked us, but she definitely doesn't now because of you guys. And it's like, she's like, yo, shut up and let me do my Olivia bit. This is going to be Law and Order, and let me do my Olivia Benson thing. Let me get my Olivia Benson back. And so she basically kind of explains, like, right, that she does believe that Charles was the intended target and not Saz. Just throwing out everything that they know right now in the investigation. Obviously, they're still in the very early stages, and there's not much else she knows, considering like the feds have kind of immediately taken over this whole thing. Which I love that, because the opening of this episode involves Zach. He's the one doing the monologue about like, understanding your character, and the entire episode revolves around Zach, Eugene, and Eva studying their respective characters and trying to understand their characters. And that ends up being the major through line throughout this entire episode. And I love that we find out Detective Williams is a massive Zach Galifianakis fan, because she's like, ooh, she calls him all this other stuff, and she's like, ooh, fuckable. And it's like, wait, they got him to play Oliver Putnam? Like, she was so disgusted, like, how could all that goodness have to be wasted on playing Oliver or something like that? And she was just like, if something happens to him, I will kill you myself. It's like, yo, I love that, like, because he's like, oh, do you want me to introduce you? She's like, no, now's not the right time. Which I'm assuming we're going to have a scene at some point in this season where she tries to like get real close to Zach, because like she's just so in love with Zach, which I think is so interesting. But yeah, the episode, like I said, revolves around mainly each of the actors following their respective characters, and we'll kind of break the episode down by that. But first and foremost, let's start off with Charles, him, and Eugene, because Eugene is the only one who shows Charles any respect about Brazos, because apparently, like, when Detective Williams was talking about Olivia Benson, he was like, oh, you like Aristotle Brazos, and she's like, I have no idea. He's like, that's the TV show I was on. She was still shrugging later on, like, I have no idea, which is so funny, which I thought was interesting, because I was like, is this our first time hearing Brazos' first name? I was like, I didn't know the character's first name was Aristotle. It kind of reminds me of Harry from the Bosch TV show, well, in novels. But like what's Harry's first name? Like, was it Harmonious or something? Like, it's based on like, I don't know if that's like a Greek philosopher, or that's something from Greek mythology. Whatever the case may be, I was like, I forgot what Harry's real name is. Like, Harry's short for, but I'm like, it kind of gives that same vibe of like, oh, I wonder is that what that's supposed to be a wink and nod to? Like, giving him that name for a first name? Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I immediately thought of Bosch when I heard Brazos' first name was Aristotle. But either way, Eugene Levy is he's like understanding, like, because Charles made some kind of reference, and then he's like, oh yeah, that was from season 4, episode 3. And it's like, oh, he does the work. which his perspective on it is like, oh, I'm usually stuck playing these very like pencil-y people, but they're usually funny. And then he's like, but you, Charles, you're not funny. And he's like, that's what makes you so interesting and complex. And I'm like, I mean, which Charles has kind of had that like knocked against him this season, being like, oh, you're not funny, or you're not that guy. You're pretty like, Charles has been there every, I think milquetoast would be very much the word to describe Charles, in the most most positive meanings of the term possible. But they're investigating Vince because they're coming from the perspective of whoever shot at Saz must not have really good vision, and maybe Vince's eye thing isn't a pink eye situation, that maybe it's more so like from kickback from the gun or something like that. So they're looking into Vince, which I love. They're both playing the little accordion things, and Eugene's good idea was like, oh, you'll drink some water and I'll tell a funny joke and you'll spit in his face and have no choice but to lift up his eye patch. But he's like, oh yeah, that was kind of a stupid idea, ignore it. But then they go with Charles' idea, which isn't that much better. I love that it's like, oh, we're just going to convince him to put in some eye drops. And they had to do this whole improv thing, because I even love that Charles is literally saying the words, yes, and... Because every time Eugene like sets up more of the whole explanation, and it becomes this like extremely convoluted thing, to the point Vince is like, what is the point you're trying to get to? They're like, just take these eye drops, take 16 drops. He's like, I know what to do with eye drops. They're like, oh, can we record it for like a video for it was like promotion for whatever family member they were saying this was associated with, because they were saying like it came from like his cousin, or more specifically, it started because of Charles' uncle, that whole spiel, and it kind of didn't work. So now we're going back to plan B of, well, let's do the water thing, which Charles is like, well, we can't do that, Eugene, because what if he is the killer and he's going to like, we set him off by spitting in his face and he'll have extra motivation to kill us. And Eugene's like, that's good. And Charles is like, yes, but he won't kill me, but might kill you. Well, no, it's like, so you should be the one to do it. Which Eugene's like, well, wouldn't that mean he'll kill me? So they're passing the cup back and forth. They do. Eugene ends up spitting in his face. Vince punches him in the face. You're just like, this was a whole shit show of a situation. But yeah, it turns out Vince actually has straight up pink eye. It is as bad as he said, and like he actually showed his eye. You're like, that's grody. It's like, oh, that's pink. And he's like, wow, I can't believe you actually thought I killed the guy. It's like, well, I thought you hated me. He's like, what? I thought you hated me. He's like, why would I hate you? It's like, every time I look at you, like across, when I look through your window, when you're looking at me, you immediately turn away. He's like, because I'm awkward. And Vince is like, me too. I'm awkward too. And it's like, oh, there's actually kind of a beautiful like thing of like, oh, you guys are actually going to become awkward friends. But it's like, well, he's not completely removed from the suspect list, because there's a photo of him and everyone else that lives on the floor, except for that one person who has like their picture, like their face scratched out, which are like, what's that about? Is that the person? Because it did. I was wondering, is that the person who lives in the apartment where the shot was fired from or whatnot? So was it Dudenoff or whatever? Like, I wonder, is that supposed to be them? And I love that Eugene had to like keep hugging him. He's like, oh, you hugged me long enough. That's enough of a hug for 3 people or something like that. So, I mean, it also plays into kind of like what Eugene said about Charles. It's like, oh, you're not, it's not like that. You are not he's like, you're not a complex person. You're a chicken shit who, I forgot what the exact phrasing was that Eugene used, but he was basically like, oh, you're a chicken shit who's kind of like afraid of everything or to make a choice. So he's kind of like, that's the angle I'm going to take and focus on when it comes to your character. Now I'm understanding your character in a different way, which that's the whole thing of, yeah, these people are like mirrors. Like, you're going to have to like face yourself in a way that you've never had to face yourself previously. You have to come to terms with yourself in a way that you've never come to terms with before. Next on, let's move to Oliver, which he's trying everything to kind of win Zach back over. To be fair, you didn't leave the best impression the first time when Zach met you, but we also know like he ends up saying like, oh, he took this role mainly for money purposes, so he's not as invested in this role. And even time like when Oliver does his thing on like when he's pressing the recording and it's like, oh, did you get that, Zach? The nuance of it. He's like, oh yeah, like yada yada yada, insert some particular reference, yada yada yada. So it's just kind of like shitting on like Oliver's shtick. So, but Oliver's trying to embrace this more and more. Like, right, you should just be you. Which I love that Howard was not a fan of. Like, oh, so that's who they chose to get to play. I guess I don't know if that's supposed to imply like, well, if they were going to pick you, they should have just picked me. I don't know if Howard's saying like, oh, you should play me in the movie. We don't know. Like, that's the thing. We've only focused on our trio. Obviously, they're the marquee characters, so it makes sense why we're only focused on them. But like, what about the rest of the cast in the movie? Like, we haven't even covered that yet. To be fair, we're only 3 episodes into the season, so that might get explored more later. But I mean, most likely as the trend continues, this is going to be like just the meta of it all. This is going to be in production hell. It's probably going to get to the point that the movie gets canceled or shut down. They might even make a like, well, it's on Hulu, so I was about to say like, not unless they make a Warner Brothers Discovery bit of like, oh yeah, the movie was filmed, edited, and everything, but they decided to keep it for tax purposes. Like. It could be that. The reason why I'm like bringing up it being on Hulu, it's like, well, Disney has also done that too with the Willow series because that's gone. Very much in like the same vein as Batgirl, and so that's why I was also like, it'd be kind of effed up in a way, even though this is a Hulu show, it's still under the Disney umbrella for them to make that joke, if that's the way they go. I just feel like with the way things are kind of going, like how the Death Rattle thing just kind of fell apart, I could just feel like this will probably be the same thing for Oliver, especially the way Howard talks about it later on, about how like no matter what, he always fails, that Oliver fails over and over and over and over again. And it's like, yeah, there's something positive about his tenacity, but the way Howard put it made it seem like, oh, you're even described him as a cockroach that refuses to die. But either way, I'll get to that in a second. The whole point is that it took a little while, but at first it seemed like Oliver was able to get through to Zach and kind of got him to understand his character. I even love him breaking down the nuance of like, well, if you're going to, he's like, because Zach's like, are any of those stories true? He's like, well, for you, you kind of have to make Oliver didn't really give an actual yes or no answer. He was just like, right, you just got to tell a story between the 60s and the 80s and insert a celebrity that you're surprised is still alive. I was like, oh, that's a little meta too, because I'm sure, like, I wonder, is that how the writers do that? Like, the people who actually write, like, Martin Short's dialogue in that capacity, is that actually how they go about writing it? Because they're like, oh, let's get a little peek behind the scenes and get super meta. And no, this is actually the process in which we make those, like, retorts that, or those anecdotes that, and tales that Oliver says, because you're like, I don't know if those are true and that's just him being whimsical like himself, or if there are true stories. Him being who he is, there's just as much possibility for it to be true, but I just thought that was interesting. And it seemed like they did hit it off, and they're prancing around, they're doing their thing, and it seemed like, oh, it's all good, it's all great. But the problem is, Zach was like, oh, this is all bullshit. Like, Oliver's a narcissist. I never wanted to play this character. Like, I wanted something, like, meaty and dramatic, but you gave me this shit, so I'm stuck here. So I took the job because you wanted me to. And it's so sad because Oliver was kind of thinking, like, oh, we're hitting it off. He's understanding my character, and here he is ripping you apart for being you. You know, but that's until, like I said, until Howard kind of put things in a different perspective of like, oh yeah, you're the guy that's like, you know, you're in this long distance relationship, which is, you know, it's ultimately going to fail. I give it 6 months. And he's like, what? And I love how we're touching to be like, most people say 3, I'm giving it 6. But then it's like the whole situation for Zach is like, but that's it. That's what you are. You're just this, you know, you're pathetic, like kind of like you're a doormat in a lot of ways. He's like, that is the dramatic character. This is what I've been looking for. This is the Oliver Putnam. This is the role I can sink my teeth into, and people will finally start taking me seriously. I think that was kind of like, oh, it's not the approach Oliver wanted him to take. Once again, it's that thing of, oh, now you're having the mirror put up in front of you, and now you have to see your reflection and don't like what you see. Whereas like Mabel has like the opposite with Eva, whereas like everyone else, at least Eugene is trying to embrace Charles. Zach wanted nothing to do with Oliver. And Ava wants to kind of take Mabel, but kind of take it in her own direction. And she's constantly referring to as we. It's like, wait, are you drinking? Yeah, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's like, Mabel's like, I don't drink 10 o'clock in the morning. It's like, well, I think this is a direction your character would take. And it's like, oh, being so like sure of yourself. And it's like, oh, also Mabel's willing to admit that she's wrong. Stuff like that. Like, Eve, I love like how unhinged, as they literally say in this episode, how unhinged Eva Longoria is. Because she's coming from the perspective of, well, we're going to look into, was it the name Rudy or Ruby? I think Rudy, played by Camille Nanjiani. And the whole like, right, connecting the tinsel, they thought it was tinsel that they found. So it's like, right, we'll check his apartment. Ava's all about like, no, we should just go in there, question him, impress him. But Mabel's like, no, we're not going to do that. So she tries to take the slow approach. Eva's already over there. I'm like, I mean, you're a big time actor, so you're able to kind of get your way. So wormed her way in. I mean, well, she was actually truthful because she was like, oh, I told him this was about a murder investigation and stuff. And Mabel's like, cool. You told him about that, because the whole point is to come into this and kind of have them disarmed and not on the defensive when we kind of question them about stuff. But ultimately, Ava was like, you know what? We've kind of messed around. We've taken this to, so like, let's just confront him. Let's get this started. Let me push some pressure points. Like, oh, here's some of your Christmas stuff. Let me break it. Oh, here's this gun. Let me point it at you and like have it swung around. And he's literally, when it's like, oh, Eva Longoria is kind of like unhinged. And Mabel's like, yeah, that's correct. I even love the whole, like, because they have the Santa doll that dances as kind of twerking, and she ends up shooting like, I don't know if it's like a Nerf rifle or whatever, but it ends up getting stuck in its butt, and it starts, I was like, okay, this is a lot. And I love the reveal of, well, his character's actually an influencer. And I love how we get super meta with this, where he's like, yo, I had one viral video or TikTok or whatever go off because it was Christmas themed. And now, unless my video's got something Christmas related to it, I get less than 100 likes. So I'm like, oh my God, that's too real and too meta, because that's the whole thing of people get stuck in their shticks, because it's like, well, it's the thing that gets me the most attention. It's the thing that keeps working. It's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And you kind of get into that point where like you have to do this thing over and over again, to the point he actually hates Christmas stuff now. He only has all these decorations because he has to constantly come up with new content, giving like, like I said, once again, he's like a fitness influencer, and he has to build all his advice and all his content around Christmas. And he's like, yeah, do you see this? And he shows off his stomach being like, yo, this is like, and it's like, yeah, how many people got to be written on the naughty list? Which immediately my brain is like, has Kumail because obviously he's still in ridiculously good shape, but I was like, he's been keeping that since Eternals, hasn't he? Because that came out in like 2021, so I was like, you've been keeping that for the past couple years. Because I did forget, because I saw, probably like most recent thing I'd seen him in was like when he was on, speaking of Eternals, when he was on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast, Inside with Michael Rosenbaum. I'm sure he's not I know he's not as jacked as he was when he was Kingo, but like it seems like he's kept that, like, a pretty solid state of that. Probably not as lean or as muscular, maybe, but like just as good a shape, but not as good, So he's probably kept in the realm of it. So I was just like, oh, I just thought that was interesting. But like he said, he kind of would have never had no reason to go after Charles because he actually hates Christmas and stuff. Because this all started because they were like, well, Charles is the one that kind of basically got the building to vote on banning Christmas stuff because, and making it so that not Christmas stuff, but specifically getting real trees inside of the apartments. And apparently it went through because he's like, oh, it's a fire hazard, which even Zach's like, oh, they really are. So he kind of co-signs that, but it's like, yeah, Rudy would have had no reason to come after Charles because of that. But once again, that photo from Vincent's place has all of them. It's interesting because, like, despite being over at Vince's, Charles has not interacted with the family, which the wife is the one who wants. Oh, right. Thinking about it because, like, Charles is that wife's hall pass, right? I forgot that's also why Detective Williams is like super into Zach. I have to call him Zach Williams. She's Zach Galifianakis. It's because he's her hall pass. So either way, I kind of went a bit of a diatribe again, but Mabel kind of learned something from this whole situation with Eva. The Mabel of it all, of you kind of learning how to be a little different from herself, like kind of, be a little more like God, what's the word and phrasing I'm looking for? Whereas maybe initially she probably wouldn't be so like go like speeding straight ahead. Now she's going to take a little bit of that, and she just like breaks into the apartment and she looks up squatter rights, which I was like, oh, that's a very pertinent conversation because I feel like I've heard like, stuff in the news about like squatter rights stuff, which is like kind of wild when you read up on that and you see all these different news stories about like squatter rights, and like it's like, no, this is my place. It's like, well, the squatter technically has more rights than you in an effed up way. I don't remember that specifically. Like, I feel like that might have been an LA thing, some of the stories I was seeing or reading about, but they might have been New York based. I don't remember. But it's just, I've just been seeing more content related to that recently. In the past couple months. So I'm sure that's become more and more of a squatter rights and stuff like that. It's become more and more of a thing. Obviously, Mabel's going to utilize it for herself. It's like, cool, if I'm at this place and I'm going to move in, for one, I need an apartment. So which is like, it's kind of crazy going to move into the apartment of a potential killer. But she's also like, right, this person's supposed to be in, was it Portugal, which Detective Williams like shot all this shade. She's like, why would they go to Portugal when Spain is right there? Am I right? It's like, geez, all the shade towards Portugal. But it's like, right, if they want to kick me out because of squatter rights, they'll have to come here and do it themselves. So they did get someone on the ham radio because it turns out the theme song for Perfect Strangers was a little bit of a theme throughout this episode. It was playing over the radio, over Rudy's radio, and also Howard heard it when he was studying over the radio for Oliver. And they ended up going to that frequency and they hear someone's voice, who this person knows the pig, which I forgot to talk about that. Howard ended up getting the pig from last episode, the one that Mabel and Oliver set free. So the person in the apartment does in fact know the pig, which I wonder was a plan to eventually eat the pig just like that family does, like, you go in the bathroom and cut you off a slice. Or did they specifically keep the pig in the bathroom because they were trying to hide it because they didn't want it to get cooked and eaten? I don't know. But whatever it is, they were like, yo, someone's already dead because of this. They were already investigating this stuff, Saz. So you got to let this go. Or you're going to end up dead like Saz, and that's where things ultimately end for the episode. I did like this meta bit Mabel had in the episode where she was like, why couldn't the actors follow us around when it was near the end of the season where we already had all the answers and we just kind of had the aha moment of us putting it all together? Because I guess it's like, right, why can't like they be here when we had our successful moment rather than we're all here stumbling ass forward through this investigation like we always do? It's like, well, you don't need to see all that, because that's the perfect aspect about the podcast. You get to kind of cut out the more messed up parts and just get to just include the better good parts of it. Now it's like, well, you're here for the stumbling part of our investigations, even though like that's a beautiful part of it. We don't include those. Well, it's always, we actually don't fully know what the produced version of their podcast. I mean, we hear bits and pieces, usually the outros to it, but we never actually know like the full context and content of the actual published podcast. Like when they've actually like when they've recorded it and edited it and everything, like what does that sound like? How much of what we saw in the episode, even though the episode links of the episodes themselves, when it comes to the Only Murders in the Building podcast itself, those episodes are the same length episodes as the TV show episodes themselves. So it's like, oh, you'd assume the content's the same length then, or is that just meant to be like a meta thing of, well, that's what the episode is linked TV show wise, but the podcast episodes aren't that same length. Those are two separate things, not necessarily the same thing. I know that I'm saying it in the most confusing way possible, but like 4 seasons deep, I've only ever really thought about that now. Like I said, we just don't know the full content of like how much of what happens in the episode is the rawness of what happens in these episodes and during their investigation. How much of that is in the podcast, because you'd assume it'd be the more polished version of it, is my point. So I don't know. Like I said, 4 seasons deep, had never really given that too much thought by now. But hey, I'm me. I think about a lot of stuff. My mind tends to wander on these little tangents and stuff like that. So either way, I'm very excited to ultimately see where the next part of this investigation takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.